I found that one of the most powerful thing is, instead of thinking about the bad things about a person, tell me what are the good things. I mean, just find one good thing about a person that you can celebrate. You see this transformation taking place in the way that people look each other in the eye, and they celebrate each other, and they advocate for each other. We aren't all trying to run to the light and bump our heads. We're all shining the light on each other.
Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead, because we believe great leaders aren't born or made, they are always in the making. I'm your host, Damon Lemby, two-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped upskill over 2 million people. In a moment, I'll be joined by Peter Bissonnette, the former president of Shaw Communications, a national telecom powerhouse with over 10,000 employees and more than $5.5 billion in annual revenue. In his brand new book, Count on Me, Peter shares how humility, consistency, and care helped shape one of Canada's most admired corporations. Here are a few things I'm excited to talk to Peter about today. How an ordinary guy built an extraordinary culture. How his unique background from boarding school to going to the monastery and then being in the Air Force has helped shape his leadership style. The secret to high-stake negotiation, whether you're on Wall Street or in a labor dispute, why great leaders believe it's important to shine a light on others, and what it truly means for somebody to be able to count on you. So Peter, in an era of look at me leadership, you really did the exact opposite. Why was that? And how did it make Shaw so special?
Well, I think Shaw's values were very unique. I mean, I've worked in family companies, I've worked in non-family companies, and to have the founder of our company, J.R. Shaw, enunciate values that were sort of empathy, caring, customer focused, though, and humility, and to emphasize that we are a we company. So everybody has a role and responsibility in the company, but we have different roles and responsibilities, but we're all equal. And so, wow, that's a profound statement, having those values and the equality, again, being enunciated by your founder. And then his boys, I worked there. His one son, who's since passed, Jim, was the CEO. I became the president. And then Brad Shaw, who worked with me, ultimately became my boss at the end of my career. So I worked very closely with the family, and they had 2 daughters, but they had the same family values that their father espoused. And one of the things that I take as a real honor today is that I'm on the board of the Shaw Family Trust. And it was something that JR, he said, I want you to be on that board because you understand what I'm all about and what values are important to me. And I want to make sure that those are passed on through each of the generations that are now, I think we're 4th, 5th generation. So it was really humility, but being committed to the values that really made us special.
Do you remember your first time meeting JR in person?
I do, actually. And, JR had been a farmer. He was a cattle farmer. And he's 5'10", but when I walked into his office and he put his hand out, he shook my hand and he almost ripped my arm off because he's used to dealing with big bulls and Rama bulls and things like that. And I went, holy doodle, this is not just some plain and ordinary executive that hasn't seen outside the world. He's been in the world. He's wrestled steers and everything else. He was a good Alberta farmer. His sons were the same way. I mean, his sons worked on the farm, and so they used to throw bales of hay around and everything else, and they were mightily built anyway. So he looked me right in the eye. He said, "Good to meet you, Peter." And when he said that, I could feel it. He meant it, and he had this. He had the most wonderful presence in the boardroom. When we had some wonderful people on that board, and when he would welcome them onto the board, he did it with passion and with conviction. So I remember that very well.
And so you have a brand new book that just came out, Count on Me. Tell us a little bit about your book and what inspired you now to write it.
When you're on Earth for 78 years, which I have been, touch wood, and people have said to me, "Why don't you write a book? You've got such a diverse background. You were in a monastery. You went to boarding school in England. You were in the Air Force. You were in the Navy Reserve. You worked for family organizations. You worked for Rogers. You were a passionate learner, but you didn't have like a formal education. I mean, my education was something that I drove myself. I mean, I went to university in Queen's University. It was like an executive MBA program. I knew there were things I had to learn along the way in order to basically prepare me for greater and greater challenges. So reading books is something else that I did that was really, really important to me in terms of learning from the best, if you will, people that had taken time to basically espouse certain values and certain ways of living, like Maxwell Maltz. He was a pivotal influence on my life in 1969 when I got out of the Air Force. So I had this experiences. I was able to experience success. I had some in my life. We all have failures, and we all have regrets. Not too many, but we all have regrets. We don't, we have a do it again button, and if you could do it again, how would you do it? So I decided to write a book, and I wanted this book. First of all, was a legacy project, and I was approached by somebody else she was a writer, but she had never written a book either, and so we decided to collaborate on this book. And so it was legacy first. This wasn't I wish I could sell thousands and thousands of books. I hope it does, but that's not what's my motive. It was really creating something that my my son and my granddaughter and then her children, that they can actually kind of take a peek into the past and say, what was it like when Peter, my uncle, my grandfather, my great grandfather was like when he was here in the 20s, the 2000s? What what made him special? How did he succeed? And so the book itself kind of walks you through in a very informal way my path, if you will, to today. And so I'm hoping, and my son Michael has read my book, and he's so proud that his dad had written the book, and he's in the book, of course. And I just wanted to have a legacy that could. And then for those that don't know me, but are also interested in history and what was business like when Elon Musk was in the world, when we had satellites, we had transformational technological changes. How did we manage those kinds of things? There was no internet when I started in business. We created the internet. We sold the internet. We built infrastructure. So all of the kind of intertwinings, if you will, of the things that my experiences, I think would people could learn from. And even if it would be, wow, that was an exciting adventure. So it's not a textbook. It's just basically a book about my life and the experiences that I had and the values that were important to me. And I think it's worth sharing.
Yeah, I've read Peter's book, and I've also had the great fortune. I met Peter through a mutual friend, Brian Lanier, who I also had on this podcast. I'll put his episode in the show notes. And what I have to say is, you're an incredibly humble and down to earth person, which I really appreciate. And I really enjoyed reading your book because you got such a unique, you've already mentioned this, but from boarding school to monastery to your music and photography. Out of all those things, is there one more than anything else that's helped shape your leadership style?
That's a great question. I think about my seminary days, and when I became the president of Shaw, throughout my life, I would, many times I said to myself, if I will never treat somebody like I've been treated in terms of, sort of the negative side of things. I will ensure that I never treat somebody disrespectfully. I respect them. I will listen to them. I hear them. I will do whatever I can to encourage them. And so, uh, you know, that's that's kind of driven my behavior. And I went to the seminary right away. And in the seminary, we used to learn about the Good Shepherd. And
Yes.
the Good Shepherd was the protector. If you think about sitting out in a pastoral setting, and there was a guy with a cane and a dog, and he had, 50, 60 sheep that he had to tend to at night when there were foxes out, etc. His role was to be protector. And I used to think if I'd ever have an opportunity to lead, the one thing that I will drive my behavior is that providing a protective, secure environment for those that I'm responsible for leading. And that has manifested itself so many times through my career in ways that, first of all, you tend to the sheep. So you're mindful, well, that sheep there might be getting into danger. I need to help them. I've seen employees that were being harassed, for instance, and my antenna were always open to ensuring that people could work in a safe environment. And so I didn't just accept it, I went and did something about it. And so to create a safe environment. So the seminary, I think, really put that into that as one of my values.
How much of that, Peter, had to deal with your parents? I mean, I didn't know this. You were kind enough to read my book, and you commented on my relationship with my father, a close relationship. And then when I started getting into your book, I realized that it was like the exact opposite almost. He wasn't there. Your mother, I mean, I can really feel it when you talked about on Sundays. I think it was boarding school, and nobody would show up, and here you are all these years later. It's all about counting on me. How much of an impact did that have?
It was huge. I have I have a reputation for being somebody that can be counted on, and it I couldn't count on my parents, but I said, if there's a reputation for being counted on, for my word is my bond, that's going to be something I'm going to do. So it evolved from, first of all, being locked in closets and saying, well, first of all, having a belief in yourself, and somehow, even as a little 4-year-old, saying, this doesn't seem fair. And so I have a fairness meter. And when I ask somebody, for instance, what was the background in making that decision, I say, does that seem fair to you? Because to me, it's down here. I want it to be up here. How do we get it to here? So questioning fairness. So my father he was a military man, a regimental sergeant major at first. Those are the tough asses, if you will, in the Army. They're the ones that create the discipline and the expectations. They're the ones that basically get you to put it all on the line. So he had that certain makeup. He was also one of 11 children. His mother died when he was 8 years old. So again, I empathize. So I know my mother, who came from 11 children as well, and my father, who was a military brat, but who was brought up in a tough environment, that they came to be what they were, and because of certain, their experiences. They loved me, but they weren't able to show it in certain ways. Like, when you play baseball, I mean, I played sports. My dad came to one of my basketball games, and I remember how important that was to me. I thought, wow, he actually took the time to come to my basketball game. And I do remember saying that if I have children, I'm going to show up. And my son might play baseball, and I actually umpired his games. I love baseball. I played baseball. I umpired his games to be connected with him, but also to show certain fairness. I mean, as an umpire, you could have shown your son favoritism, but no. I tried to be absolutely unbiased and fair. So my parents essentially, they created a benchmark for me to overcome. The benchmark was, they didn't believe in me, and I believed in myself, and I was going to basically show them that I deserve that kind of, if you will, confidence. And my mother and I did have reconciliations, as you read in the book. She phoned me once crying because she realized that she hadn't been the best, most loving mother. And I attributed her behavior to postpartum. I didn't know what postpartum was, but when I look at it in retrospect, she had 7 children, all within 9 years. She was a young girl, a 21-year-old lady in England, living a certain life. And this Canadian man came over there, took her back to Canada. They had children. They were very Catholic, and there was an obligation almost within the Catholic Church to have children. And they went about life, but that was overwhelming for her. And I was the middle child in the family, so I'm sort of I'll call it the mediator, if you will. But so when I look at my mom, I think of somebody that had a horribly disruptive, life after she was 21 when she came to Canada, and all these children, and we were all very different. And so in the book, you see that she sent 2 of my sisters away to England 2 years beforehand. And that was really to take some of the stress off herself. And one of my sisters, who's an artist, one of those two sisters, um, she described a conversation she had with my mom where she said, if I hadn't done that, and if I hadn't left your father to go to Vancouver, I would have had a breakdown. And so that all goes to my empathy in terms of my mom. She was 102 years old when she died, and we had a fabulous relationship. I took care of her, and I ensured that she had the kind of quality of life that we'd all want our mothers to have in their later years. She had a great sense of humor. She had a kind of a rude sense of humor as well, the British sense of humor. So, but they established for me the motive, if you will, for me, the driving force for me to do what I did in life, and to have the courage, if you will, to make the kind of decisions I did make when I left the Air Force.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, I mean, first of all, being locked in the closet at 4 years old and having this belief in yourself where it'd be so easy to just play the victim or make excuses. What advice do you have somebody who's stepping into a leadership role for, let's say, the first time in their career, and they're uncertain if they're capable of doing it? They don't have that belief in themselves yet. What advice do you have for them to help overcome that?
Well, the Maxwell Maltz talked about affirmations. And when I was in the closet and I was creating affirmations for myself, as simple as they were, I believe in myself. I believe in myself. I believe in the power of affirmations. And so to the extent that we are all faced with challenges, whether they're a point where you're trying to achieve something, achieve a goal, by applying the power of affirmations, you're actually painting a picture for your brain. Your cerebrum is a very powerful mechanism in your head that if you paint a picture for it, it can actually make that picture come true, if you will. It can actually induce feelings of what it feels like to achieve something. And so being visually clear about what you're trying to do, about also looking to people that have the skills that are necessary, not necessarily do you have the skills, but surrounding yourself with like-minded people with like-minded values. And I don't mean like-minded in terms of cloning. I'm talking about we have the same vision of what we're trying to achieve. They bring something different to achieve those. So surrounding yourself with really powerful people who understand how to achieve certain things, creating a team or being a part of a team, and being able to use the power of visualization. Maxwell Maltz was his whole book was about visualization, and the power of affirmations. Before I came on your show, I said to myself, when I'm chatting with Damon, words will come to me as though they were the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. There's this whole level of energy and knowledge that's available to us if you ask for it. And so those affirmations are extremely powerful. And so to the extent and I've had these conversations with people in the company. First of all, fit is the most important thing. You have to be able to fit into an organization. So because some people, we're all made up differently. So looking to be a part of a team that can contribute your talents to this team, and then contribute to that team through your energy, your commitment, and your clarity of vision, I think is really important. And so at a junior point, when I was in the Air Force, I said, I have to have certain things to succeed in the Air Force. And I was only 20 years old, 21 years old. But to do that, I said, I have to be physically fit. So I worked out a lot. I love sports. I love team sports because they, frankly, are like little arenas of business. And to have the conviction of what you're doing and putting in the effort to succeed. So I was a radar technician, and I said, that pilot in that aircraft, in that Hercules, or whatever aircraft it is relying on me to do the best possible job that I can because his life relies on that. And so recognizing, let's call it the consequences of your actions and how important they are in terms of satisfying what we're trying to achieve is another skill putting in the effort, finding the learnings. I mean, the whole life is about learning. For me, when I was in the Air Force, I said, I was in transit and I said, I want to take every possible course in radar that I can possibly get. And they love training people. And so to the extent that I love being trained, but so be responsible for your own learnings, your own capabilities. Make the initiatives to go to night school if that's what you need. Learn about business accounting if that's what you need. Learn about negotiations and if those are the kinds of things you need. So making a commitment to yourself for your own self-improvement, values, understanding what the values are, what are my values, and do they mesh with the values of the company? Do you believe in a we kind of a company? Do you believe in yourself? Are you committed to what it is we're all as a company trying to achieve? So that's a kind of long answer to many of the situations that I've experienced where you have some people that are asking you, how can I do what you did? So mentors are also a part of the whole process. Finding mentors, they'll find you as well. But when you have a mentor, my God, use your ears, listen, observe, see how they're acting, and so learn from them, learn from their actions. How have they succeeded?
So question I have, well, first of all, I'm going to steal that sports is like a small arenas of business. I love that. I'm going to always do that. I think a big point I wanted to just highlight that you mentioned, I don't want it to slip by the audience, is that when it comes to your own learning and growth, nobody cares more about that than yourself. That you need to take ownership of that yourself. If you're in a job and your leader tells you, "Hey, look, we don't have budget for coaching or learning or whatever," take it upon yourself. We'll get into mentorship more, but you got to own that. You can't outsource that to somebody else. That's not gonna work for you. So, and also you talked about fit in an organization. Do you recall a time, it's had to happen, where you brought on a senior level executive who you thought was gonna be a great fit at Shaw, and it turned out to be awful? Why do you think that happened, and how did you get yourself out of that situation?
That's a great one. If you just remind me of what we used to call this person, dead pillow.
Dead pillow?
So this person came highly recommended by somebody that we really that we respected, and he said, "Could you and you have a programming position in your company, would you consider hiring him?" So Jim and I chatted about it. We said, yes, this person has made this recommendation. We really trust his judgment. And so we did, we brought him in and, and the first thing we did, we said, let's take the first month or so for you to get oriented to what it is that we're asking you to do in terms of creating a bit of a business plan for our programming groups. And we have community programming throughout the whole country. And those were our local programming, our connection to the communities. And then we saw them as being sort of differentiating kinds of experiences on TV. So anyway, this person, after 3 months, I said, "So how's it going? Are you making good way? You're meeting lots of people." And I got this sort of zoned look from him, and I went, "I don't know whether if we're going to be disappointed with what we're going to hear." And so and of course I would talk to my boss, say, I'm trying to encourage him to come along, and I ask where he's going and working with people to help him to be successful. But it turned out that it was dead pillow. Um, it did nothing. Nothing was there that we were expecting. I was expecting this wonderful, well written plan about how we can do certain things in the community, how we can create very differentiated content, etc. And it didn't happen. And so I had to have the the very straight conversation that this probably is not going to work. And what I found was lacking was his initiative, his drive. He When I said dead pillow, I think everybody had got the same sense. There was no dynamics. There was I call it a theoretical kind of smarts, but there wasn't a practical kind of smarts. Where and during that time, I thought he could actually be reading what were important to us just by the energy that we would expressed to him in terms of how we were looking forward to what his views of the world after 3 months. And the views were very dull and unimpressive. And so we had to make that change. But it was disappointing, but I learned from it. When I first met him, even though he was recommended by somebody, my instincts were that this may not work out that well. And so I think I learned from that in terms of, if your own instincts as one of the leaders of the company are that this isn't a good fit, it probably isn't. You can't move people more than 5 degrees. When somebody has, if they're the way they are is the way they are, and you can certainly move them 5 degrees left or right, but you're not going to be recreating a dramatic human being. They are what they are.
They are what they are, and I've been there with you as well, where you can't overlook your instincts, because sometimes, especially after you've had experience and you've learned from the experiences, if there's something that clicks in there, you should really vet it out more and test it, because I've been there too, where it's like, okay, well, we're going to move forward with this, but something just doesn't seem right. Now, I wanted to, you brought up a couple of things. One is, I think all about your leadership is less about theoretical and academia, and it's really, the real world experiences and learning and evolving and trying and testing things out. Um, and through that, you've really built, I think you talk about in your book, like a leadership toolbox. Can you share what's inside that toolbox?
That's a great question. Well, there is a saw. I saw it. And occasionally there's a hammer, which you don't
And a
want to use
dead
too often. There's a dead pillow. So what's in my toolbox is a recognition of critical skills. Relationship building is clearly one of those. Now, how do you, like, having the ability to reach out and have others embrace a vision of what is success, and doing that through communications, doing that through involvement with them in communications, vulnerabilities. I mean, I remember, I used to have to vet every budget in Shaw. So we had 25 different locations across the entire country. And every year we'd go through a budgeting process, and we would call it a zero-based budgeting process. But we would have them, the manager and his marketing person and his operations person fly into our headquarters in Calgary, and they would bring their budget, and they would, et cetera, et cetera. So, but having the ability to go through that budgeting analysis, but be very candid with how it was impacting what you were intending to do, you being the company, to put together a meaningful, no BS kind of budget that is practical and will do what we want to do in terms of building plant or providing for sales or providing for training, et cetera, et cetera. So, but be able to give feedback in a constructive way, and is another, I call it one of the tools in the toolbox. Having both candor, transparency, um, being able to be a chameleon. Chameleons, they can change their colors and depending on what's going on and around them. You have to be able to do. I mean, because when you're dealing with people and their skills, you're dealing with some people who are very creative. Somebody's in the media side of our business, or you're dealing with a practical engineering person that they are black and white, and you have to be able to correlate and relate to those different kinds of people, because they serve a huge purpose in making your company successful, but they may speak a different language than you culturally. So being able to be culturally dynamic in terms of understanding what the roles are of the people that were a part of your team, and how they fit into the organization, and then advocate amongst ourselves for those people. I mean, we did have a very diverse management team, because we're made up of marketers, we were made up of salespeople, we were made up of operational people, we were made up with scientists, and we all had to kind of get along. And my role as a leader was to find the best in each, and so that's part of the toolbox too, which is that I think takes a certain amount of I'll call it life experience to be able to get to that point.
I want to go back to chameleon in a second because
Yes,
that's a big part. But if I'm listening to this show and I don't have a lot of life experience, is there a way to accelerate that so that you can get there quicker?
there is. I mean, reading is one way. I
Reading and
mean,
mentorship.
reading and mentorship. I read in 1969 Maxwell Maltz book, Holy Doodle. That was a profound impact on me. I was the radar technician. So Maxwell Maltz's book, Psycho-Cybernetics, was about I'll call it a psychological radar where you teach yourself how to see something in the future, and then you use feedback, whatever the feedback mechanisms are. So it could be people giving you feedback. It could be the situation giving you feedback. It could be your sales results, but essentially targeting a picture and being able to do that. So reading was what taught me that. I mean, and reading and putting into practice what I was reading. So I didn't just read it. I mean, I read your book and I put those things into practice. They actually resonated with me because I go, holy doodle, this guy knows what he's talking about. And so as a young person, that's why they go to school, is to learn certain things, and the certain gaps in their knowledge base. You can fill those through mentorships, through asking questions, through self-development. I mean, we all have developmental needs because that's what we bring to the party. So if I was a radar technician, and so I had to do whatever I could to be the best possible radar technician I could be. And then in the process of doing that, you're running into instructors who are teaching you. You're looking at how they conduct themselves and the way they communicate.
Really, you're being
Communicate.
curious. I mean, you're being
Yes, absolutely.
curious, open-minded, and also, I believe when it comes to chameleon, in your book, you talk about, I believe it was a course you took from Lou Tice,
Yes.
and,
Oh, he was
com
fantastic.
and I want you to talk a little bit because we already went down that route, but it is, I wanna emphasize, I think the best leaders, I'm in agreement with you, you need to be a chameleon because you can't just treat everybody the same way. And that goes for external as well, right? I mean, you've been on Wall Street, you've dealt with labor negotiations, and so you gotta kind of adapt and adjust.
If I took one thing out of Lou Tice, it was chameleon. And as you said, I mean, I went to Wall Street to negotiate a $2 billion acquisition of a media company with Goldman Sachs. I'd never been to Wall Street.
I gotta stop you right there because Brian Lanier texted me this morning and he said, "Please make sure Peter tells the Goldman Sachs story."
Oh my God. Thank you. Well, that was so I had never been to Wall Street. First of all, what brought me there was J.R. Shaw said, Peter, I want to buy CanWest Global. And the Royal Bank, who was kind of, they were sponsoring this, they didn't want Shaw to buy it. They wanted Rogers to buy it. And when JR said to me, I want to do something, to me, that was the marching order. And so I said, this was really important to JR. He has a vision of what his company wants to look like. And he's asked me to basically make that happen. I was an operating guy. So when he said that, I brought a couple of guys into the conversation, our regulatory person and our financial person. I said, we're going to New York tonight, and we're meeting with these bondholders that who own $400 million worth of this company. And then there's Goldman Sachs that own another 700 million. We're going there, and our objective is to buy this company. And when we went there, we were looking at, first of all, at just buying a controlling interest because of the Canadian regulatory environment. So we all flew. We went to dinner that night with the $400 million bondholders, and they and Goldman Sachs were arch rivals. And if you've ever, bondholders are like every nickel is important to them, and if they get out nickeled, they get really choked. So we met with them, and the reason we were meeting with them was to see whether or not there was a good fit. And of course, I wanted there to be a really good fit because that it had to be in order for me to reconcile JR's desire to buy it. So we had a nice dinner, and we talked about why we thought that Shaw would be the right company to partner with in terms of, the controlling shares that they had. And at the end of the day, they said, we like what we hear. We said to them that we have probably the best relationship with a regulator in Canada. They trust us. They look to us for advice, even though they're regulating us. They like the way that JR is well respected in the industry. So they like all the things about Shaw. And so they said, we'd like to do something with you. And so that was the first night. So we agreed that we would be agreeable. So the next day we were all going into, there was a meeting of that, those bondholders who had owned 400 million, Goldman Sachs in the Goldman Sachs building, in New York. And all of these lawyers, yes, all of these lawyers and the people representing each of the different interest groups, and Shaw. And there was, at Shaw, we had 3 or 4 people. We had, our financial person, we had our regulatory person, and we had, I'll call it our banking person, and myself. And Goldman Sachs, the guys from Goldman Sachs came in, and there was already a natural antipathy because in Canada, they had tried to undermine us to one of the other people that they really wanted to buy the company. So there were competing kind of legal things going on at the same time. They were trying to basically screw us over in court before we even got there. So when we went there, we were in this huge boardroom. There was more lawyers than I've ever seen in my life. And we met the person that was chairing the meeting, was there to facilitate conversations. In walked these 2 people from Goldman Sachs, and this guy was in a suit that was worth more than my car.
What year was this?
This would be 2010.
Okay, 2010.
His claim to fame was he knew that, he was really friends with the New York Yankees baseball team,
Yeah, good for him.
and Jennifer Aniston was, one of his love interests.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
anyways, he was a very different cat. I'd never seen a guy with a suit like that, but he actually ignored me. He came in and I was talking, and he sat down, and he had a person with him that I think he was training to be as nasty as he was. Anyway, I was talking, and he just was talking to this buddy there. So I stopped the conversation.
But what was going on in your head when you see this guy who's like flat out ignoring you?
I was, I thought, well, I felt insignificant, first of all, because, all the lawyers and that were kind of,
But you're the president of like a $10 billion company with
Yes.
from Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. And he was a slick, I'll call him Slick Joe.
Yeah, Slick Joe.
And so I stopped the conversation. I just stopped. And I waited for him to look up. I said, Jerry, I had a dream about you last night. And he went, that was kind of, I said, yeah, I dreamt about it. I dreamt that you and I hugged. I caught his attention. And I said, we hugged because we made a deal. You were selling CanWest Global to Shaw. And we hugged because we made a deal. And I said, instead of grandstanding right now in front of all these people, why don't you and I leave the room and just have a one-on-one conversation about what's going on here, what we're trying to achieve? Well, he took me up on it. But I mean, everybody was shocked in the room. And here was Jerry. He was the head of the of Goldman Sachs in Canada. This was his big account. So he went out with me with his, the guy that he was training. And I said, so let's put all the bullshit aside. Let's get down to what we want to do. What we're trying to achieve is we're trying to buy the company. And you're a part of, obviously, the acquisition. If we buy the company, we have to, somehow come to an agreement. So you were describing a process that you thought would be something that would be appealing to us. So we need to understand what that was. And so we actually engaged him in conversation. But what he was actually wanting to do was basically us bankrupt the company. And I said, Jerry, you obviously don't know J.R. Shaw. We don't buy companies to bankrupt them. We buy companies to grow them. So what you're suggesting just won't work for us. We have to buy the company, and we have to buy it because we know it's going to basically grow. And this can be a part of a very important company. We're looking at the media side of a company who are all operating guys. He said, essentially, I know what happened. So after we had that conversation, all the people in this big boardroom were waiting for us. And the bondholders, the good guys, we'll call it, the $400 million guys, came in and they looked at me and said, "What the hell's going on?" They thought that we were plotting against them. And I said, it was a whisper. I said, "No, no, they just want me to screw you over." I said, "But we're not. I can tell you that. Don't worry." And so he kind of had this relieved feeling on his hands. And when they came back in, we said, "You know what? I don't think that we can really get to where we're trying to get to today, but um, we think that we could with some mediation." And so we all agreed that we would come back and we would put our best foot forward, if you will. So the great news was that when we went into the meeting, we were going to buy 10% of the company. When we came out of the meeting, we realized we had to buy the whole company. So we went from a $200 million acquisition to a $2 billion acquisition. So I had to go back to Canada and talk to JR and the board about why this was such an important, why it would be such an important part of an acquisition, because we knew that the bondholders, who every nickel is like a manhole cover, that they would want to have a part of the pie, and they would. So what was 700 and 400 between them now would become much more greater value, and that we would have to then buy them out at a greater value, and it would be harder to buy them out at that time.
How did that conversation go, going from 200 million to?
It went really well. JR trusted my judgment, and we recounted exactly what had happened. We and we did this in front of the board as well. So we had a quiet meeting with JR, and then he wanted to meet with the board. So we met with the board, and they basically approved a resolution to spend up to $2 billion to buy this company.
Peter, but when you go at home at night, and we're not talking about, $2 million, we're talking about $2 billion. What is that? I mean, do you lose sleep that night worrying about something like that type of money? Or at that point, it was just part of the game?
I do worry about it. I took it seriously, and because we were known as a bottom line, a really efficient, effective kind of company that, when Rogers who are our kind of cousins, if you will, in Eastern Canada, they would have margins sort of in the 35 to 30 to 40% margins. We prided ourselves on having 55% margins. So our efficiencies, the way we spend our money, the use of capital, we had just slightly different approaches to it. So when we were talking about $2 billion, that was a lot of money, to put at risk. And there had to be a convincing argument to do it. And the convincing argument at the time was that having media would be really important to us. We were basically a nuts and bolts hardware company. We had launched the internet. We were probably the most successful in all North America in selling the internet because of the way we priced it and the way we built it. And we built it so the customers, the experience was as good as you could get. So we had a reputation for doing things well and doing things in a cost-effective way. So the board approved it. And JR was, the Olympics were happening in Vancouver. And I recall when we actually did the deal, and I told Jerry, when we've done this deal, we're going to have a big hug. So get ready for this big hug. And so it was very kind of untoward. So I remember when the deal was done, and I said, "Jerry, I'm down in LA. I'm coming to Vancouver, but you owe me a big hug." And he went from an adversarial kind of thing to a really very happy pumpkin. But what they were still trying to do was drag that last nickel. If they thought that the guys, the 400 million guys, got a penny more or advantage, they were grinding it. So we had to manage these bondholder grind, so that we could bring it close to it, do the deal. But JR was so proud. I went on the BCTV News and announced, they were interviewing me for this deal. JR was in Vancouver and he was watching me talk about this deal. He already knew we'd done it, but when I came to see him, he was so proud. Yeah, he said, "I've never been prouder." And
How'd that make you feel?
I felt fantastic because his son was the CEO, but his son, unfortunately, was going through some challenges in his life. So it was JR trusted me enough to basically carry the ball and run with it. So I felt phenomenal. He felt it. I don't think I've ever seen him more happy because this was something he came to me saying, I want it. And we delivered. And it was as creative as we could be in terms of the way it was delivered. We did go through some arbitration process, but we worked ourselves to the deal. So it was resoundingly popular. Rogers wanted it, but they recognized that one day they might buy us and they get it anyway, and which is ultimately what happened.
That's a great story. And in Peter's book, he's got amazing negotiation stories. I don't want to give away all of them. One of my favorites, you don't have to, is when your buddy Rory fell off the chair, fell backward. And what kind of leverage it gave him after that. I mean, I first loved an earlier negotiation you had when he told you you're an ugly person and you said, well, you haven't seen my wife yet.
Oh, is that a flashback? Sorry. Yes. Well, I was kind of I was well. I like to have winners and winners, and so not somebody that's you do a deal and all of a sudden they've got no clothes on, they can't afford to live, etc. We want to have If we buy a company, we want the owners of the company who built the company to be fairly treated and to give them the value that we see and what they see in that transaction. So on the labor side, it was I used to negotiate agreements, and I remember when there was a labor dispute in Vancouver, and during the period of the labor dispute, I actually went from Rogers to a family organization that had the same union. They were all on strike. And on the first day of my job, I was able to settle that labor dispute. And 3 months before, Rogers had settled that labor dispute, and it was a really acrimonious kind of time. But the owners of the company that I was going to, they had a very different perspective. They weren't trying to kill a union. They were trying to have a relationship with the union that was equally as attractive to them as it was to us. So win-win. You cannot go wrong with win-wins. And if you can come out of labor negotiations or any negotiations where both can hold their head up high and they both feel great about what they actually have acquired as a part of those negotiations, it could be a company, or it could be a collective agreement. It could be anything that you're negotiating for in terms of values and benefits. And so that win-win is a huge part of what I think goes to my fairness meter. And after a deal is done, how do I feel? How do you feel? Do you feel it's a fair deal? And if it's not, then I think you need to find where that sweet spot is.
Well, I also think that you don't want to be penny smart and pound stupid, because in a lot of these negotiations, whether it's labor or whether it's a contractor agreement, whatever it is, you're probably going to have to deal with these people at some point down the line for a different negotiation. So if you try to do a zero sum, knock them out of the park, and then you have to come back, they're going to come in adversaries
Yeah.
towards you anyways.
Yes. Well, these, of course, the workers that we were negotiating these labor disputes they were our employees, and they were dealing with our customers. And there is nothing worse than having an employee go to a customer's home miserable and dragging their head and saying, bad things about the company. We wanted them to be able to trumpet what the benefits of the company were, because they were actually bringing good things to the customer, whether it's internet or cable box or more channels or telephone. And so they were the carriers of wonderful things. And to be quite frank, candid, one of the win-wins is that they actually represent you in that way. And so our labor relations were extremely positive. We had very few unions. In fact, we were an anomaly in Canada that we had, I'm just trying to think of employees, 10,000 employees, maybe 400 were in the union. And that was because we treated them fairly.
I want to switch gears a little bit, because you also a huge music fan. I mean, we talked about you had your soundtrack of your life above. Before I get to my real question, what is one song off that soundtrack?
Led Zeppelin, um, a Led Zeppelin song, and it was one that was when I had my heart attack. Um, it was a song that was playing in the OR when I was being operated on, and when I had a heart attack, was defibrillated 13 times, and I had 100% blockage, and it was the Black Widow, and so I remember going into this operating room, and the surgeons were all getting gloved up and everything, and they had Led Zeppelin, that song. I'm just trying to remember what the song is right now because it's in my book, and it wasn't "Babe, I'm Gonna Miss You," but it was.
And I hope it wasn't Stairway to Heaven.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't that either. It was anyway. It was a song that resonated with me because Led Zeppelin was one of my favorite bands, and here was the surgeon going in to do something that was going to save my life, and it was, even though I was out and kind of out, it resonated with me. Now, my Little Wing is one of my most, my favorite songs was the Jimi Hendrix song, and it was one of the first songs I learned as I was playing the guitar in 1971, taking lessons for 11 years. But so Led Zeppelin, I saw Led Zeppelin at least 4 or 5 times live.
Did you ever get them to play at Shaw? Or I guess that was before Shaw.
Yes. Our band used to play the Christmas concerts for Shaw. And
your band, you had different employees from you played with your employees, right?
Yes, our boys.
So what relationship did playing in a band and music and everything have to tie back to leadership?
Well, if you can let your hair down, you can just be yourself, and there's people that were, I'll call them sales reps in the company, or some of them were installers, contractor installers. And when I first moved to Toronto, I was only there for about 1 year and 3 months, but I formed a band out of employees. And I said, I want to find, is there anybody out there that plays the drums, plays the guitar, can sing? And we put together this unbelievably good band, and we used to play on Yonge Street, on the blues bars. So when I moved to Calgary, the first thing of order of importance to me was not just to get acclimatized to Calgary and all of our leaders, but also to find musicians of like purpose, et cetera, because music was a huge part of my life. So we found a band, and we actually were able to, I had a recording studio. We recorded an album called Magical Lady. And when we finished that album, I said to our chief lawyer, I said, I want to find something really good to be able to do with this. And she said, well, I have a friend that died of lymphoma, and she had 5 children, and her husband is a lawyer in Vancouver, and he's raising these children now. And I said, oh my God, that sounds like, so we called this album Magical Lady in honor of, and we went to Vancouver. Him and his family flew to Calgary to see my recording studio and to kind of be around each other. And Jim Shaw just loved it so much. He said, I'm going to donate, I think it was a couple $100,000. Every new employee that comes into Shaw is going to get your album, Magical Lady. And they did. So for 2 years.
You probably went to the top of the charts.
We did. That's right. They're going, holy doodle. Yeah. So we played in Kelowna, where I am right now, on Millennial New Year's. Our band was the headliner band. Now, nobody ever in the band thought, I said, I've got this gig. I got it in July. We're playing New Year's Eve, Millennial New Year's Eve. So this is a huge deal. And the owner of this Coliseum has asked us to play. And so are you all in? And if you're all in, this is what it means. Every night we're going to practice for 3 hours between now and December 30th. And then we're all going to drive to from Calgary to Kelowna. And we are the headlining band. And so it was a process of, we learned 50 songs. These were alternative rock, Lenny Kravitz, Collective Soul.
I love it.
And I thought 50 songs, that should get us through the whole night. And it did. And so music was a huge passion of mine. I mean, I collect guitars. In my house here, there's 150 guitars in a room here.
150?
In this room, yes. And then I have a bunch more in California that I've collected. One of them, $100,000 Jimmy Page signed, autograph played guitar, Les Paul. So that's another part of kind of when I die, my 2 boys are going to be sharing, probably there with all the guitars, about 200 guitars.
Wow. That's and so that's a great story because and there's music and then there's also photography. So all this creative side to you. And do you think that that lends towards making you a better problem solver?
Absolutely. There was a book that I actually bought because of you. It was Improbably Successful, and it talks about the power of having an extra language. And to me, music is an
Juan
extra language.
Silvera.
Yes, absolutely. And that really resonated with me because I thought, wow, I actually speak Latin, when I from the monastery, and I thought, why am I what is it about music? Well, music is attractive to me, both from a creative point of view, but it also has a logical kind of side to it as well. And but I was a computer programmer, and the computer programmers have to have logic and keep and think of things really simply. So the whole side of music to me tested one side of the brain. So there was the logical business side of the brain, that can add up numbers and everything else. And there was this whole creative realm, which was music and photography. And photography was as big a passion of mine as music was, and it still is. I mean, I love photography, and I've done books and etc. on just a study on hummingbirds. And I remember a friend of mine, I think I talked about in the book, that when he died, I gave his wife this book called Hummy Mummy. And I talked about when I did my eulogy, I didn't know what I was going to talk about when I went to that eulogy, but it it was almost like an inspiration from heaven. It said, talk about the hummingbird and heaven. And so I thought, wow, when I watched these hummingbirds leave the nest, I didn't know where they were going, just like the soul when we die. I don't know where it's going, but I know they're in good hands. And 2 days after they'd left the nest, one came back and it just sat in a tree. And I'm like, oh my God, they are there and they are here. And with our souls, it was the same way. I tried to draw that parallel. And the wife of the person that died, she gave me the biggest hug. I could just feel like almost like a guardian angel hugging me because she loved that. That I basically created a picture for her that he's still there and he's still here and he's present, but you just can't touch him.
That's amazing. We almost have to wrap it up here pretty soon, even though I could probably talk to you I got so many questions for you, but I want to bring it back to, I think at a point, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Shaw have like a 98% employee satisfaction rating or some widely
Yes,
nuts?
it was. Yeah, I remember when it started because we went through an engagement process. When it started, there was, there's still dysfunctional pockets in a company. So we were, I think, at 68% engagement, which they said it was phenomenal. And we said, no, it's not. That means that, 40% of our employees aren't engaged or 30% are engaged. What we'd love to achieve is having 95% engaged. We know there's always going to be a fringe element. And so we, as a management team, we and as directors and managers, we said one of the things that we would really like to be able to achieve is that our employees have smiles on their faces. They're feeling a part of the company in terms of where we're going, whether it's achieving goals, but also the compensation that we provide for those goals, the feeling of worth, et cetera, et cetera. So we went, and that's part of what Brian Lanier was all about, was making sure that even our leadership teams, that, they were all on the same page in terms of how we're treating our employees, how we're respecting them. What are the ways that we can in fact engage them so that they become even more satisfied? And there's a real, obviously, financial benefit. You're not having dealing with churn and person turnover and everything else. And so, to the extent that we got close to 90%, it was a factor of everything and within the company was focused on how can we all feel more engaged, and asking questions about why we weren't engaged. We did engagement surveys every quarter, and one of the keys was following up. If somebody says that this happens, or that when this happens, it really troubles me, I took it personally. I mean, I used to take the engagement surveys home, and they were like a book this big, and I would read them. And these were all confidential, but I would read them, and I go, "Holy doodle, how could we be doing this?" And so I would put a list of sort of priorities for myself and our team. How we're gonna, and these were these were specific examples that our employees had given us. And so these were like a calling card to ways that we could improve what's really going on in the workplace. And so we did. We moved our engagement probably 25%, which is huge. And the people that we were dealing with it, and this,
What were the top 2 things that came up very consistently that you made the change that had the biggest impact?
I think listening to feedback and actually acting on it. Wow. So they had a voice. Anyway, that's enormous. And that they felt they well, there was one group of our engineers. I told you that we looked after. I mean, I had the vice president, senior vice president of engineering, working with me, and it was interesting that within the company, many employees realized that the engineers seemed to be on a different path. They didn't seem to be happy. So when our engineering person retired, I decided that I wasn't going to fill his position. I was going to do it. And so I had a chance now to go one-on-one with all of the engineering staff and find out what it was that was made them dysfunctional. And there was so much dysfunction. There was resentment. They didn't feel they were heard. And of course, as engineers, some people, they don't understand what they're saying. Whether you're talking about Pythagorean's theorem or whatever it was. I actually, being a technical person in the Air Force, I understood radar. I understand all that stuff. So we could actually kind of
There's
talk the same
empathy.
language. Yeah. And so they said, here's somebody we can actually talk to that actually understands what it is to be an engineer, to create projects, to build things, to build cable plant, to understand. He understands distribution. And so going through that, even having the conversations, I realized that there were some people that just weren't a good fit. They did not belong in that. They were resentful, and they were actively poisoning the work environment. And I said to myself, "Wow, the prognosis of this is we need to maybe make a few changes in here so we get more positive kind of things going on, as opposed to people complaining about what's not good, but those that are starting to celebrate what's good." And so we went through that process, and I was actively engaged in that. And wow, all this, and then we, in terms of who the leaders were with the directors and managers, we looked for those kind of attributes, people that are, positive, that can reinforce it, communicate well. And wow, we saw this transformation in engagement because that was the last, if you will, when we were looking at our overall engagement scores, that the engineering group was had the lowest engagement, and then all of a sudden they were the shining stars because they now felt a part of something, felt heard as well, and they had a voice that was being heard by our leaders, and an understanding as well. I mean, I found that one of the most powerful thing is instead of thinking about the bad things about a person, tell me what are the good things. I mean, just find one good thing about a person that you can celebrate, and that starts to all the other ones start to fade away. Wow, that person is brilliant in certain aspects, and let's celebrate that. And then you see this transformation taking place in the way that we people look each other in the eye, and they celebrate each other, and they advocate for each other. We aren't all trying to run to the light and bump our heads. We're all shining the light on each other, and that was a huge transformation within the company in how that brought our company to be a much more successful, engaged, and effective company in terms of the way we commute, the way we build our plants, the way we escape, the way we hurt our customers, and so that's not me. That's somebody at my front door. Excuse me. I turned that. So anyway, it was the engagement went up because the people within the organization felt more engaged and they felt a part of the company, and it was a huge transformation, and it was measurable as well.
These days, it's so important from everybody that we talk to that people want to feel like they belong. They want to feel like they have purpose, and that there's it's more than just a paycheck. It's something that they belong, and that's so important. And we started off the conversation by talking about not shining the spotlight on yourself and really learning how to deflect as a leader and giving the credit back to other individuals. I think that really helps inspire people to learn and grow. One question I have for you that I ask a lot of people, it's something that I think it's really important is how do you become the type of leader that your team members say, I don't want to let Peter down. not for in a bad way, not through fear, but because of trust and respect.
Wow, that's what drives me is I the fear of letting somebody disappointing somebody and leaders that in the company, as you know, there's leaders and there's followers, and it's great that we have followers, and if to the extent that they can have you have an engaged fellowship. They when they share when they see you as a leader with the same motives, the motives that are actually trying to achieve something, as opposed to so self-fulfilling motives. I'm doing this for this, my own kind of greed. No, we're doing something because it's the right thing to do. The way that we're being in terms of the way we deal with our customers, the way we're building things, the way that we interface with each other. There's a that feeling of engagement actually runs through our DNA. You are a part of the DNA of a company, and to the extent that you feel good about what we're trying to do, and you feel good about the relationships that you have with your colleagues, to the extent that you have shareholders that support you. I mean, JR used to say, "There's shareholders, there's employees, and what else are there? The shareholders, employees, and there's our families." And to the extent that we can have this homogeneous, positive kind of relationship between all of them, and the purposes that we're doing things are for all of them, that becomes the holy sauce, if you will, holy grail of of a fundamentally healthy company.
Yeah, and for context around that too, you got your employees, you got your shareholders, but also at one point or another, you're servicing over 3 million homes or customers.
Yes. And so what we would have, I would call 5 customers a week. And these are brand new customers. I'd phone and say, "Hi, my name is Peter Bissonnette. I'm the president of Shaw, and I see you just got my services. Could you tell me how we went? How did we do?" And they'd go, "You're the president?" And I say, "I am the president, actually, and I care." So caring enough to phone them and ask them, and I would take notes. I would actually, we would, and I would have all of our VPs do the same thing, and so we would have somebody collate those calls. What's the feedback, and where can we improve what we're doing with our customers? Where did we screw up, and how can we make sure that's not happening again? And it was just that became just our way of being, and customers loved it. They were shocked many times, but wow. And I would say, anytime you have a problem, you call me directly. And so they had this permission to call me. You know how many times people say, "Don't." If it's a customer, don't you take it. I talk to customers, and we all did, and wow, that we were better for it.
I mean, you first of all, you must have some amazing stories of things people would tell you, and you're really modeling the behavior. I mean, if you're the president of a 10,000 person company and you're making those calls, there's no excuse for everybody else not to, because it's showing how much you care and you're learning. Um, and grow. It's amazing. I mean, we do have to wrap up here now, but I wanted to say, with your book, and I've heard you mention this before, and I think this is important for the listeners. Your book is almost like a case study when it comes to what people can learn from it. Touch on that a little bit.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely right. It's not a textbook, but it is a case study. I love case studies, by the way. When you think about is in skill unwind case study, this happened, that happened. What did you do about it? This one is a case study in how can you, well, all of the elements, even there's sub case studies in it as well. So, the Hercules that crashed, how did that happen? How did you deal with that situation?
Yes.
The Can West acquisition is a case study. So it's a series of case studies, but there's also a consistency in terms of if you're looking at a case study on how you apply your values, how you live your values as leaders. This is a case study of the outcomes from doing that are that you get letters like I've received since I've written the book from employees that go, "Wow, Peter, I used to work for you for 10 years. My husband just left me. I was reading your book and I actually took pictures of the pages. I started crying when you talked about some of the challenges that you faced. And I looked at that and how can I face that same challenge? My husband's left me, but wow, what about the good things that are happening? And how can I move on from that?" Just hundreds of examples of those kinds of feedback that I've had from employees. It made it all worthwhile because there are learnings. It is the case study, but it's an easy read, I think. But it's got some surprises in it, and and it's, I think, got a happy ending as well. That
Yeah.
I was able to leave, and some, I'll call it some prognostications, if you will. What's the world going to look like in a certain period of time?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I mean, there are so many different fun and interesting and stories that take different twists and everything. So kind of just to recap a little bit about what we talked about today. We talked about the importance of caring, the importance of listening, how learning impacted your career. It's less about theoretical and it's learning through life's experiences and adapting. And this great leadership toolbox that you talk about in your book, from the monastery to boarding school to the Air Force, the tough childhood you had growing up. I mean, so much. Really, the importance of chameleon leadership and how negotiation needs to be win-win. I love your Goldman Sachs story. My last question I have for you is, what do you want people, especially young leaders, to take from your book, Count on Me?
Well, it can happen, you see, and we deal with young people, and to have if to know that there is a path to success for all of us. We're all unique individuals, and one of the other aspects of this is the whole spiritual side of it. I know it's, some, my book originally was called "Have Faith in Yourself," and people said, "Oh, faith, that's not a very good name," but actually is a very important part of it as well. Is so if you have your faith in yourself, if you have a vision, and you have the purpose and the drive to do it, you can achieve anything. If you can see it, you can be it, and that is a powerful algorithm. If you can see it, you can be it. And if they can live that commitment, I can see it. And all of the things that you have to do to get there, they become self-evident because they'll come to you in waves of awareness. If you aren't looking for an airplane, you're not going to see one. All of a sudden, if you say, I wonder how many airplanes that, all of a sudden airplanes start appearing out of the sky, things will become apparent to you that because you're now focused on looking for things. So have confidence in yourself, believe in yourself, have a vision, relationships, look to the relationships that can help, that have purpose in your life, because they're the vehicles, if you will, that get you to where it goes. You don't do it on your own. JR was always such a humble founder. It's, I mean, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I rely on very smart people to help me to become successful. I rely on their abilities, whether it's information systems, whether it's marketing, sales, operations. Those are the smart people. Leaders to be able to somehow um, impact those by creating a vision that we all share, and they basically make what's happening happen.
That's great. And I like to say too, leaders shouldn't be heroes. They should be hero creators.
Absolutely.
You lead and you
Yes.
learn through your people. Where can our listeners connect with you?
Well, first of all, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Peter.Bissonnette or Peter J. Bissonnette will get you to my site. And I am quite active on media. I post a couple of videos every once in a while, just a small little message of hope. The book is, Count on Me, and I'm proud of this book because it is a legacy for me. And ingeniumbooks.com is one way of getting it, or Amazon on July the 18th, which is this Friday. Amazon.com will have both the digital book as well as my paperback book. I've actually ordered also some hard copy books, which uh, will be coming probably in the next month. And my audio book, I narrated myself, and talk about reading your own work. It was quite,
I did it.
it was unbelievably powerful because I thought, wow, did I actually say that? Or did
Yeah,
Lucy say that? Because I have to give credit to Lucy as well. She and I worked on this in a collaborative way, and I'm really happy with the results. It does, my voice is there, and it's done in a very creative way. So, and I really can't tell you how much I appreciate your advocacy.
Oh, come on. I mean, this has been a wonderful experience for me, getting to know you. And I appreciate my new nickname that you gave me as you're a for our audience. I mean, Peter is a social media wizard now on LinkedIn. And as I was preparing for him, he made a nice mention of me. I'll put it in the show notes along with everything else. My new nickname is the Cracker Jack of Learning, which I love.
I love that too.
I
My
love it
wife
so
thought, "Oh
much.
my God, how can you do that?" I said, well, that's what it is. He is a cracker
Yeah.
jack.
Yeah, and you got to check out the other episode that Peter mentions too. Is my good buddy Johnny Pardo is a great dude, and Peter mentions him too. But I am the Cracker Jack of learning, Peter. And for our listeners out there, look, go buy Peter's book. I mean, it's a great story. There's so many learning lessons, but it's also fun. And so please check it out. And until next time, everybody, stay curious, keep learning. Have a great day. Peter, thank you so much.
Nutrition is a big thing because food is fuel. What we eat can impact how we feel, our cognitive abilities, inflammation, which is a huge problem.